Chapter 869. This Luo Jia has some skills. Jiang Hai couldn't help but say to Bell, who was beside him as he looked at the people on the field. He originally thought that these unruly people would cause some trouble, but now it seemed that the state government and Mayor Wallace had their reasons for believing in Luo Jia. This Luo Jia used to be a member of the Marine Corps. He participated in the war between Vietnam and Iraq. Because of a suicide attack in Iraq, half of the entire team died. He was a little discouraged, so he retired from the army and returned to Boston, where he became a police officer. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bell also said seriously, "Wow, there's such a thing? No wonder Mayor Wallace trusts him so much." When it came to the armed forces of the United States, the police department was the FBI and the CIA, and the military department was the Marine Corps and the Marine Corps. Even if Jiang Hai was not a military fan, he had heard of this before. To be able to enter the Marine Corps, this Luo Jia was not an ordinary person. It turned out that this guy really did have some skills. On the first day, Jiang Hai wanted to give up on the program, but after 3 days there were only 240 people left. Nearly 60 people couldn't take it anymore and quit the training. However, these 240 people were much more spirited than they were 3 days ago. Of course, they didn't have the aura of a soldier. After all, they had only trained for 3 days. It was good enough that these people could stand straight now. And these 240 people were all wearing the camouflage uniforms that Jiang Hai and the others entered. Jiang Hai didn't lie to them. These clothes were indeed military products. The United States was different from China. In China, military products were not so easy to see. This was because most of the things were mainly for the military. In the United States, the military and civilian industries were actually mixed together. The American arms giants all appeared in the world in the form of companies. If the military wanted something, they would put forward an idea. For example, if the military wanted to fight in the desert, underwater, cold weather, and so on. After the request was made, these arms companies would go back to their own companies to research. They would not go to the National Academy of Sciences or something like that. When the deadline was up, they would bring out the research results. If the military picked something, it would be a jackpot. It was as simple as that. In addition to supplying the military, this company also sold to the outside world. For example, the civilian version of those firearms. Who do you think produced them? These military uniforms were exactly the same as those of the United States military. The only difference was that Jiang Hai didn't have epaulets or collar badges. With these, he was actually a real soldier. The camouflage uniform, belt, military boots, tactical vest, leggings, and water bottle were all fitted according to the standards of the Sea Nation Marine Corps. Moreover, they were the latest AOR camouflage. After 2 days of showing off in China, this set of clothes had become very popular. The price had been raised to nearly 10,000 yuan per set. However, it only cost $420 to buy it here. Of course, $420 was enough for Jiang Hai and Winthrop to make a lot of money. Because Jiang Hai bought these clothes in bulk, each set only cost $160. The rest was profit. Jiang Hai was making money and the tourists were happy. That was enough, wasn't it? These days, many people came to Jiang Hai to say that they wanted to buy a few more sets. However, Jiang Hai was using muscle marketing. If they didn't sign up, they couldn't buy it. As for the 60 people who didn't insist, they would rather give up the $150 registration fee and buy the clothes. As for the first batch of people who didn't sign up, they were also rubbing their hands and waiting for the second batch. Today was the 3rd day of training for these people. Tomorrow they would enter the mountains. Therefore, Luo Jia wanted to teach these people what they could and couldn't touch in the mountains. Apart from snakes, spiders, and centipedes, which were obviously poisonous, ordinary lizards couldn't be touched. In addition, there were many plants that couldn't be touched. For example, there were many common plants in China. Manjushri, balsam, wheat, flying swallow grass, 8 immortal flowers, evening dew, lily of the valley, and so on. Even morning glory was poisonous. Its stems, leaves, and flowers were all poisonous. The most poisonous was its seeds. If you accidentally ate them, you would vomit, have diarrhea, have bloody stools, urine, and so on. There were also acacia beans, southern sky bamboos, calla lilies, and so on. These were all poisonous. If Luo Jia didn't say it, even Jiang Hai wouldn't know, let alone these people. Many old people were willing to grow flowers in the mountains, especially those whose wives had retired. They liked to grow flowers because they had nothing to do. However, these people really didn't know that these plants were poisonous. Many people even had grandchildren at home. They had already decided to throw away these flowers when they went back. It was too much of a scam. For them, learning this kind of knowledge could be considered as earning some money. After class they left early. However, before they left, Luo Jia divided them into groups of 20 people. There were a total of 13 teams, and each team was accompanied by 3 policemen and an interpreter. They also had GPS, satellite phones and so on. Tomorrow morning they would take a car and enter through 13 different entrances. Tomorrow morning they would gather here at 8 o'clock sharp. If they were late they wouldn't bring him. Jiang Hai was a little worried, so he would follow the oldest team. With him and Belle, the policeman could relax a little. After all, it was their first time entering the mountains. No one knew what would happen after entering the mountains, but it was still a try. Early the next morning, when Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the field with their shields, the 26 people were already divided into 13 groups of 20 people. The police were also ready. After Jiang Hai arrived, his shield was left here. He and Belle got into one of the cars and set off for the Alabama mountains together. The car that Jiang Hai and the others were in was a modified F-150. In fact, the other cars were also modified from F-150. This car was really cheap in the United States. More than $20,000 could buy a new car. Obviously this car was not new. A second-hand car only cost a few $1,000s. As long as it had not been hit hard, this car was quite sturdy and had good off-road performance. The modification was very effective. At least, the old men around Jiang Hai were quite excited. After getting in the car they had been taking photos. Although they couldn't go online because the mobile phone card in China was different from the network used abroad. Unless they turned on global communication they couldn't even make a phone call. Young people might be willing to turn on their mobile phones, but these old men couldn't. So they took photos now, and when they returned to the place where they lived tomorrow, they would use Wi-Fi to send the photos. But to be honest, even if they turned on roaming it would be... The internet in the US is famous for being slow. It's just like the 4G internet in China. It doesn't matter how many gigabytes it is. In terms of speed, South Korea is the fastest and China is the second fastest. So don't say that everything abroad was better than in China. At least in terms of network, express delivery and so on, it was far worse than in China. After taking photos, an old man sitting next to Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask Jiang Hai, "Little Jiang, have you been to the mountains before?" Jiang Hai and the others divided these old people into groups, mainly based on age and familiarity. If a few people knew each other they would be divided into a group. If a few people were from the same family, they would be divided into a group. If they were not from the same family they would be divided according to age. They were all in a group in their 20s, a group in their 30s, a group in their 40s and a group in their 50s. Those above 60 were not allowed to sign up, so a group in their 50s was the limit. This grouping was also to avoid trouble, and at the same time to let everyone have fun. And I have been there. Hearing the old man asking him, Jiang Hai also nodded and said to them with a smile, "Is it fun in the mountains? Are there any large beasts? What's there after going in?" Seeing that Jiang Hai had gone in, the uncles here all asked him. These people were still relatively close to Jiang Hai. Everyone knew that Jiang Hai was rich, but Jiang Hai didn't seem to have the bad temper of the nouveau riche in China. Instead he was very polite and kind. He was worried that these old people wouldn't have fun, so he came to accompany them into the mountains. So these old people's impression of Jiang Hai was quite good. If it wasn't because they knew that this guy was a very lecherous person, they even wanted to introduce their juniors to Jiang Hai. It's just a normal primitive forest. Our vehicles have to stop outside the forest because there's almost no road for vehicles to move forward. It seems that only my off-road vehicle can move forward in the entire town. After entering the forest, you'll see a lot of trees, grass and animals. However, we can hunt some of them and some of them we can't. After entering the forest, we just need to listen to the police. But you can rest assured that there will be enough prey for you to hunt inside. Looking at these excited uncles, Jiang Hai smiled and told them in detail about the Alabama mountain range. Jiang Hai had already entered this mountain range 6 or 7 times. Although it wasn't the same as his own courtyard, at least there wouldn't be any problems inside. Of course, this was the Alabama mountain range. If he went to a strange place, he would have to bring his family's little white and little yellow first. In the forest, these two guys were quite fierce. Chapter 870. The car soon arrived at the place where Jiang Hai's team was going to enter the mountain, because there were too many people this time. Therefore, in order to avoid bumping into each other in the forest, they entered the mountain from different places. The uncles in Jiang Hai's car maintained a state of extreme excitement all the way. When the car stopped, they also became excited. "Next, we are going to enter the mountain. Everyone come and get your equipment." After the car stopped, Jiang Hai also got out first. After translating the words of the 4 people sitting in front, the uncles also lined up and walked over. Before entering the mountain, They had already applied for the guns they needed. Many people asked for rifles. After all, compared to shotguns and hunting rifles, Wuxia people preferred rifles. In addition to rifles, 2 people also asked for hunting rifles. When they asked for hunting rifles, the people next to them were still laughing at them, but now when they saw the hunting rifles, they could not help but lick their lips. It seemed that hunting rifles were also good things. They were going into the mountain to hunt, not to fight at the front line, so the guns they asked for were very old models. For example, the rifle Jiang Hai's team was the M16, the oldest model, the one that was replaced after the Vietnam War. There were many problems, but this gun was enough to enter the mountain. Naturally, they used the civilian version, 5.56mm bullets. There were only 5 bullets in the magazine and they could not be shot consecutively. They were the kind that could only be shot once. Each person was given 5 magazines, plus a box of 200 bullets. After they returned, they would know how many bullets they had used. As for the shotgun, it was indeed much more powerful than the rifle. The hunting rifles that these people were given were double-barreled hunting rifles that fired deer pellets. Each pellet was as thick as an adult man's thumb. The rows of pellets hung diagonally on their bodies like Lamborghini. They looked much more powerful than the civilian version of the M16. For a while, the 2 uncles who got hunting rifles kept taking photos, making the people next to them envious. In addition to the guns, the police also gave them a lot of things such as mineral water. However, they were required to put it in a water bottle. Plastic bottles were not allowed to be brought into the mountain because they were afraid that the tourists would throw them away. There was also a Swiss Army knife. Of course, it wasn't the expensive kind. It cost $3. The money was from the state government as a benefit for them. They could bring the knives back to China. There was also a set of quick heat rations for military use, which would come in handy if they couldn't find any prey. After everything was prepared, everyone was ready to enter the mountain. Alright, everyone get ready. We're going to enter the mountain. Because most of the animals here are protected, I will not allow you to shoot as you wish. If you discover a herd of deer or wild boars, I will call you. Only then can you hunt. You are not allowed to shoot other animals. If you insist on shooting them, that is fine. But the United States is the same as China. If you shoot wild animals, you will be sued. Looking at these uncles sitting here, the police officer in front couldn't help but say to them. After hearing what the police officer said, many uncles who had other thoughts couldn't help but restrain their thoughts. If they only had a problem with Winthrop, then it would be fine. If they were sued in the United States, then the loss would outweigh the gain. After resting here for half an hour, everyone set off again. They had to rush to a small stream to rest at noon. If they didn't leave now, it would be too late. Although this team was a team with preferential treatment, they couldn't be too slow, right? After walking for almost an hour, at around 11 o'clock in the afternoon, they arrived at the place where they were going to camp. The stream wasn't wide, but it flowed very fast. Jiang Hai glanced at it and saw that there were no fish in the stream. It seemed that they had to go to the forest for lunch. After removing some gravel and sprinkling insect repellent, the police officer led everyone to a place where they could eat lunch temporarily. Then the police officers set up 2 shelves with pots that could be used to cook things. Seeing that they were done, Jiang Hai also told 2 of the police officers that he and Bell would bring another police officer to hunt. After that, Jiang Hai and the others were about to leave. But before leaving, the uncle who had been talking to Jiang Hai stopped Jiang Hai. "Little Jiang, are you going to go hunting?" Looking at Jiang Hai, the uncle said with a face full of excitement. "I'm going to get you some food." Hearing the uncle's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. There was nothing to hide. "Can we go with you?" When he heard that Jiang Hai was really going hunting, the uncle here asked him eagerly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's first thought was to refuse, but after thinking about it, it seemed that it didn't matter. "You can go, but you can't take a gun and there can't be too many people." Looking at this man, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said, Okay, just me." Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, the uncle here couldn't help but laugh. Then he went back and gave the gun to a person he was familiar with, and then followed Jiang Hai into the forest. "Little Jiang, I didn't find any wild animals along the way, is it reliable?" Following Jiang Hai, the uncle here said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also patiently explained to him. "This is just the periphery belonging to the buffer zone between wild animals and humans. They would be fine after resting in the forest for a period of time. As for the more than 60 deer, only 3 of them were left behind. Yes, the 20 people fired at least 300 bullets, but only 3 deer were hit. It had to be admitted that this was a little embarrassing, especially those who were holding rifles. Of the 3 deer, only 1 was hit by a rifle. The other 2 were hit by a shotgun. There was no other way. The deer were shot in a large area and the rifle was only an eye. It was difficult to hit these deer. According to the previous allocation, the police still remembered who shot which deer. They had already said that the deer that were allocated were their own. After the shooting, no matter if the deer was shot by a person or not, the deer would be his. This also put an end to the possibility of stealing the deer. Looking at the owners of the 3 deer that had been marked and celebrating loudly, the people who didn't manage to hit the deer couldn't help but sigh helplessly. This opportunity had been placed in front of them, but they didn't grasp it. Who could be blamed for that? Looking at the police over there, they went over and bled the deer. Then they sealed the things in the deer head first. When they returned, they would be specially made into specimens. It was not that there were no deer head specimens in the country, but they were all made of deer skin, bones, and stuffing. They were not real deer heads. But this thing was made of a real deer head. The 3 people over there were so excited that they did not know what to say. Looking at the 3 people over there, the other 17 uncles felt quite uncomfortable. It was a pity that they did not shoot the deer. However, in the end, the Lakers were still inferior and lost the game. They welcomed their 4th consecutive loss. Jiang Hai was not a fan, so he didn't feel anything when the Lakers lost. After leaving the arena, he drove back home. After 3 days of playing, Jiang Hai and the others were almost done playing. Now they were just waiting for him to finish watching the Clippers game. Then they would be ready to leave. However, they wouldn't be idle for the next few days. There were still some things that needed to be done. First, they needed to buy a car. Yes, Jiang Hai was going to buy a car again. However, he wasn't going to buy a car for fun at home. He was going to buy a car for mining, a military off-road vehicle. In addition, he also needed to buy guns, bulletproof vests, and explosives. Because no one knew what would happen after entering the mine, it was necessary to prepare everything. Chi Jia also needed to prepare a lot of first aid medicine. In addition, Jiang Hai also had to spare a day to visit the guy named Bruce David. Although Jiang Hai was very concerned about the gold mine, he couldn't put the cart before the horse. The badge was actually the most important thing. Jiang Hai's biggest goal in coming here was to figure out the origin of this badge. His 6th sense told him that this matter was not as easy as he thought it would be. Chapter 879. I'm here to visit. Looking at the guard in front of him, Jiang Hai also said politely to him, "You're here to visit? What are you looking for?" After hearing Jiang Hai's words, the guard came over and said with some doubts. Quite far away, Jiang Hai can smell the stench in his mouth and the strong smell of disinfectant on his body. It's almost the same as in the hospital, but thinking about it, isn't this a hospital? I'm looking for Bruce David. Suppressing the unhappiness in his heart, Jiang Hai looked at the guard and said, "Oh, you're looking for that man-eating pervert? Go over there, let me tell you that guy is not to be trifled with." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the guard here couldn't help but laugh. It seems that this Bruce David is crazy. Even the people here know that he wants to eat people, which made Jiang Hai feel a little disgusted. But even though he felt a little strange here, he still nodded his head as a form of thanks and walked into the castle. And just as he walked into the castle, the guard couldn't help but turn his head and smile ferociously. Then he slowly turned back and continued to patrol. There were cold concrete buildings everywhere. Guards in police uniforms were either patrolling or standing guard at certain places. Doctors and nurses were carrying some equipment and walking up and down the corridors. And looking from the outside of each room is welded with extremely thick steel bars, sealing the windows, and the sunlight can be seen, but that's all. The glass in the room is integral. Jiang Hai looked at it. It should be bulletproof glass, not worse than the windshield of his shield. This kind of defense is understandable for Jiang Hai. Because not only in China but also in the United States, there are many rich people who kill people or commit crimes. They don't want to go to jail, so they make up a story that they are mentally ill when they kill people. The court can't do anything about it, and there will always be some garbage doctors who testify for these people. Under such circumstances, these prisons are their final destination. And although they can save their lives here, Jiang Hai knows that it's better to die than to live here. So in order to prevent the subordinates of these people from breaking into the prison, the defense here is not ordinary. Jiang Hai secretly estimated that he may not be able to break such glass. Even if he can break it, the steel bars are too dangerous. After Jiang Hai entered the door, Jiang Hai found that they seemed to be looking at him, and that gaze made him a little uncomfortable. But after all, this is a mental hospital, so it's understandable that Jiang Hai feels a little strange. Walking to the reception room in front, Jiang Hai gently knocked on the table. Then a young woman in a white coat raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts. Jiang Hai was also looking at this woman. He had to admit that this woman was not bad. The nurse's station they were in was an empty space in the middle of two corridors. There was a table with some medicine and other things on it. In front of the nurse's station, there was a TV, probably to prevent the nurses from being bored at night from doing their duties. At this time, the TV in the nurse's station is on, but because there is no signal, the TV in front of the nurse's station is like a snowflake. Two bald people in patient clothes are sitting there motionless, watching the TV in front of them. Seeing this strange scene, Jiang Hai felt his scalp tingle. He is not afraid of normal people even if they are special forces. Jiang Hai can beat them. Most importantly, he can understand their thoughts through their movements. But facing these mental patients, how can Jiang Hai deal with them? You don't know what they are thinking and you don't know what they are going to do. The unknown is the biggest fear of human beings. Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and he felt a little scared. However, he had to pass by the nurse's station, so he had to go there. As soon as he walked out, he didn't know if the two of them had some special hearing ability, but they immediately sensed Jiang Hai's presence and looked at him. When they looked at Jiang Hai quickened his steps to shut them up. But to Jiang Hai's surprise, the two people didn't shout after seeing him. Instead, they turned their heads back and looked at the TV in front of them. Jiang Hai, who was originally moving forward, can't help but stop. Could it be that these two people are not in the same group as those crazy people? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai walked in front of the two people and waved his hand in front of the first person. Hey, you are blocking my view of the TV. Jiang Hai waved his hand and the person on this side spoke. Hearing him speak, Jiang Hai was also stunned for a moment, and then he couldn't help laughing at himself. It seems that he was mistakenly knocked down by those guards. Those guards only know how to shout, but mental patients are not mutes. Why can't they speak? It seems that the person in front of him should be less mentally ill, at least he can communicate with him. I'm really sorry, can you tell me what happened here? Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and asked them. What happened? Isn't it the same as usual? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person on this side said with some doubts. It's not the same. Didn't you see that the nurses who picked us up have changed? And the chef has also changed. After hearing this person's words, the bald man next to him turned his head and looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face and said to him. Oh, that's right, the chef seems to have changed. The food he made is too disgusting. There is still feces in the intestines he made today, there is still feces, Look, Sun Wukong is going to beat the white bone demon.